All right, I want to welcome everyone to Right Size Home Building Concepts. This course is approved for continuing education units in many different areas, as well as AIA, Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. My name is Brett Little. I'm with the nonprofit here, the GreenHome Institute, and I will be your moderator today. Before we kick it off, a huge thanks to our top tier sponsor, Build Equinox, featuring the Serve 2, a smart ventilation system. Unlike traditional ERVs or HRVs, it features many qualities of smarter balanced ventilation and feedback monitoring. With a standard ERV or HRV, you get constant low airflow rate with no relation to indoor air quality or occupancy. So according to this chart, for the first 3 days when the home is occupied, the air quality is poor, the ERV just can't keep up. When the occupants leave on vacation, the ERV keeps ventilating and wasting energy. Since the SERV actually monitors air quality, it ventilates only when it needs to. Compared to an ERV, the SERV can ventilate quickly up to 300 CFM, purging pollutants from the home. And then when no ventilation is needed, it can go into recirculation mode and filter the air. The SERV does this by monitoring CO2 and volatile organic compounds, which determine when ventilation is necessary. As you know, many gases are undetectable to the human nose, but can be detected by indoor air quality sensors. Your occupants and your clients get to set whatever air quality levels they want to be at and configure the SERV to best suit their needs. And instead of an ERV exchange cord, the SERV has high energy efficiency heat pump to exchange energy between incoming supply and outgoing exhaust air. So you got conditioned, comfortable air that unifies the home instead of dragging away exterior rooms. The SERV's filter access panel allows the homeowner to easily inspect it and change out the filters, and the SERV gets up to MERV 13, which comes standard with the unit. And very excited, this is made 100% in Urbana, Illinois, in a facility that's powered by 100% solar power energy, and it pairs very well with a Rheem heat pump, which can be used to boost capacity per radiant. Pairs great for Mitsubishi ductless mini splits to help move that air, conditioned air around the home. Or if you're going with geothermal, it uses the GeoBoost to pair very well with the GeoComfort water furnace system as well. So go to buildequinox.com and learn more today. And then a second, thanks to our second tier sponsor, Ava Window, R7 windows, aluminum, recycled content, you name it. All right, so can we live larger in smaller homes? We know that homes that are smaller, right-sized homes, they use less energy, right? It takes more energy, lighting, ventilation to condition larger spaces. It's just science. And so that's just a natural benefit is you get by having a smaller home, it's going to use a lot less energy. The other thing is that less materials, right? Less strain on our environment, less material demand, and ideally more cost benefits to that. But the challenge has always been, how do we encourage people to live a little bit smaller so that it makes sense for them without sacrificing their comfort, what they need in their life. And so we're really excited to be introducing our speaker today on this topic, who is helping solve this issue. I've known Bruce for 10 years now, since my college days where I met him at Aquinas College. I interned under him at a company that was looking to support wind farm development. So we've really come a long way, and so I'm super excited to have him on our show today and be talking about this important topic. Bruce Thompson's career is a convergence of two passions, the built environment and the digital revolution. Early influences include the family business of civil engineering and land development, growing up in West Michigan, home of the office furnace industry. Upon completion of graduate school, Bruce embarked on a 20-year career in global technology industry in various corporate development roles. Following 2 successful startup exits, Bruce and his family migrated back here to Michigan to start what would become Urbaneer and today serve as its CEO. Urbaneer is a small space living pioneer working to help relieve the housing crisis through innovation, solutions that integrate the physical and digital world. And so with that, Bruce, I'm so excited to have you here, and please do take.
Thank you very much, Brett. Let's see, if you're going to share the screen, then I can click through this, correct?
How's that?
There we go. details. All right, just making sure here. All right, we're ready to go, Brett? Everything good? Okay, I'm just going to jump in here. Thank you very much, Brett. And as Brett said, we've known each other now for a decade, which is hard to believe. And a former student, and has gone on to do some really great things, which is always exciting when you're teaching. But what I'm going to talk about today is really a labor of love. You'll see a case study here a little bit later of a compact home that my wife Brenda and I, who's the co-founder and designer behind Urbaneer, that we live in Heritage Hill in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so we really live this, and it's been a journey ourselves. As Brett said, you know, right-sized homes really are out of the gate, I think, a more sustainable option. But part of the backstory on this, before I jump in, is we were living in almost a 5,000 square foot LEED Gold home in West Michigan here that we built. I think we were one of the first in West Michigan. And I learned a really good lesson with that house is, you know, it doesn't matter how efficient you are. If you have a large space, it takes a lot of resources to heat and cool it. And one day sitting in the backyard, my wife Brenda had the inspiration that we really wanted to downsize and get back to a lifestyle that we had in Europe 20 years ago, living in a small apartment with 2 young children in Barcelona, Spain, not having to take care of a large home and a lawn. And we had come back to the States and kind of forgotten all that and jumped right into the home that I had talked about. So, you know, this is a lesson that we've learned. And I always say to everybody, you know, smaller sized homes aren't for everybody, but I think we have such a massive shortage out there that they are one really great solution to the housing crisis, but they require a new approach. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So in terms of kind of an agenda real quick, I do want to touch on the housing problem. We all, I think about it daily, that anybody that's in the industry is just a massive challenge right now. Want to talk about, again, our approach, right-sized homes, compact homes, a lot of different names there, but it's a similar concept. Want to talk about some of the challenges, but the flip side of that is opportunities as well. And then I will go through some case studies with some of our work. One thing, Brett, I didn't think you mentioned, but please, if there's any questions, please submit them to Brett as we go. Let's make this interactive. Happy to answer questions at the end, but can take them along the way as well. So a little bit first on the housing crisis. And as an innovator, Brett talked a little bit about my background. It's interesting because in the 30 plus years of my career, it's always been focused on innovation, and innovation, of course, is about problem solving, right? It's one thing to have a good idea, but you've got to get it out to the market where people are actually using it, and it's manifested in the world. So as an innovator, it's frustrating for me to sometimes look back at the last 7 or 8 years focused on home building and realize that we really haven't made tremendous progress. We've probably gone backwards. Excuse me. In terms of being able to meet the demand that's out there. And, you know, there's a lot of good data about why that is. I won't dive into that today, but there's somewhere between 6 to 8 million unit housing shortage right now in the US. And the way we look at it is kind of break it down into the 3 Ps here. There certainly are policy issues that prevent homes from getting built or additional homes. Also, you know, vast process issues, again, well documented, and I'll touch on some of those in a minute. But then also, I think where we really come into it is not only the process, but on the product side. And I read something recently that was great that talked about how, you know, home building for a lot of the units that get produced out there, they're really snowflakes, right? I mean, we build different versions of things every day, which is okay at a certain part of the market. But I think if everything becomes a one-off, you know, there's going to be some challenges. So a lot of our approach, again, is how do you productize and standardize the options around housing. But if you look at the market gap, there's a great book, by the way, that came out this summer called Missing Middle Housing. Daniel Paralek, I think it is, Opticos Consulting, that's on the slide there. And what he really, and his firm points out, Opticos, is, you know, years ago, we used to have many more housing options. And I know in the neighborhood that I mentioned where we live, Heritage Hill in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I can walk around and see examples of duplexes, fourplexes, eightplexes, whatever might be. I can see accessory dwelling units, carriage houses, all of which, 60, 70 years ago and 100 years ago were viable housing options, right? There wasn't zoning that precluded those from being constructed. And I think that's a lot of what the industry and certainly my work in Urbaneer is focused on right now, is how do we bring some of those housing types back and make them, available to people by right, so that we don't have to go and try to get a variance every time we want to do something that's not single family oriented in a lot of our urban neighborhoods. So I like this approach. I like being able to talk about, again, different housing options for people. I think that's what we need right now. There is no one size fits all, certainly, but I'll talk a little bit later about some of the demographic trends and what's driving it, but we certainly do need more options. But when we look at the process side, so I talked about the 3 Ps. On the process side, I think McKinsey does the best job of really articulating, some of the challenges. And some of you out there might have seen this over the last couple of years. I think 2016 was the big year that they came out with their first report, where it really talked about how the industry has not seen any major productivity gain for over 60 years, which is really interesting when you think about what else has happened in the last 60 years, specifically the tech sector. And you look at automotive, the automotive industry, you look at agriculture, they've all seen tremendous leaps and bounds, again, driven a lot by, information technology and data. But that's just something that we haven't seen yet. I think, this is a global figure, but $1.6 trillion a year, really due to inefficiency. And you think about that, we could build a lot of housing with it. And I don't have the US numbers here, but they're substantial. I guess you can see the North America. So, I look at this again as an opportunity, but certainly it kind of outlines, what we're starting from. We're starting from, this is a bad joke. We've dug a hole, right? We need to dig more. But clearly, there's a lot of work to do, to get that process efficiencies in place. So if you look at it, I often tell the story. It's imagine, if you compare the housing industry to the automotive industry, which again, very different, but there are some things that we learned 100 years ago. There was a reason that Henry Ford, delivered the Model T in his famous color of black, and that was the only version available. Well, it was to drive efficiency, right? And it's in a standard model and standard options, and that's where they were able to get the mass market adoption of the automobile. So, but if we were to call a car dealer today and they came over and they put it together in our driveway, and it was a model that they had never seen before, a crew that had never maybe worked together, certainly hadn't built that model, the results would vary, right? But you think about home building today, so often, it comes in over budget, takes longer, and for the most part, not everywhere, I don't want to generalize, but the quality varies. And if we got a car delivered where a door was crooked and there were some parts left over, that wouldn't be acceptable, right? And if the dealer said, hey, I don't know when I can get it to you and I don't know how much it's going to cost, that just wouldn't fly. So, we need to shift to more of that production model, and it's happening certainly in the industry. If you look outside North America, you'll see double-digit offsite construction, specifically in Europe and in Asia. We're still in the single digits here, so a long ways to go. But I included here Tesla because this is something that we think about, at Urbaneer, and I think others are thinking about too. They did such an amazing job, not only on the innovation, clearly the electric vehicle innovation and all that they have in their designs, but really where they disrupted the market, it was kind of on this touchless delivery, right? Bypassing traditional dealer channels and being able to deliver a car to your house very easily if it's standard options, right? So they have this custom order or existing inventory. And they were really worked hard to build a brand around that, and again, gain consumer acceptance. Not that we can deliver, a house to be occupied that day, but you'll see in a minute we're getting there. I mean, if you can get it down to 30 days or less to be occupied, that's a big boost in the industry. But their marketing is something, that we really look at a lot, just because it's all around predictability. And I think that's a big missing factor today in the housing industry. But if I can tell somebody, when it's going to be delivered, how much it's going to be, and a consistent quality, that is light years over where we are today. So some of you might have visited Offsite manufacturing facility. If you haven't, I really encourage you to do that. I visited my first one maybe 4 years ago, a little bit longer, but it's very impressive. And to see a module going down the line, being finished by a crew, that's typically has worked together before, consistent quality control processes, and in some cases building standard models, but in others it's mass customization where they're able to use a prescribed list of things and put it together in a different configuration. But what they achieve here again is back to the predictability. If I know that it's going to take, maybe there might be a backlog in the factory, so maybe there's a 3 or 4 month backlog, but I can tell somebody, hey, in February you're going to be able to get this model at this price, again with this consistency. That's a massive gain. And what I'll add here is I think, when you look at smaller units, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, things really have to be designed from the inside out and really have to work together. So that's why the offsite, and we're also doing quite a bit of work right now with prefab panelized, again, with kind of a standard bill of materials, just like other industries. But we can design a home that's really integrated to work well together, through a series of components, which again, I'll expand on. This happens to be a unit that was dropped into a backyard in not our unit, but in Portland, Oregon by a company called Dweller. And it's just a great example. This was actually craned over a house into the backyard, so that's the finished product, and about a 30-day period to do the infrastructure hookups. And I think it's a really great model. I'll just expand on it a little bit. What Dweller does with accessory dwelling units is they actually rent out your backyard, and they will place that unit there and do a revenue share with the homeowner. And I think it's 10 years later, the homeowner owns that backyard unit, again, as a rental or for a family member. So what's our approach? We talk a lot about human-centered design, design thinking, pretty much the same approach. But you're really starting from the beginning of, or the starting point rather, is empathizing around a certain type of need, in a home. And I think when we're in a small home, it's very critical to start there. When we did our early prototyping, we went into a warehouse, mocked up 400 square feet, and we really started to think about, okay, if I'm in a smaller living space, what are the things that I need to do in that space? It's cooking, it's dining, entertaining, working, sleeping, and now more than ever, we're doing all of that plus, remote learning, telehealth, working out. And so it's been interesting to think about this in light of COVID. Our spaces have to work harder than ever. And the challenge often is, again, as I said, that's multi-purpose space. And so we really have to think, again, about the occupant, what's the experience, and really step back from the inside out and think about those living modes. And so in our work, we do that, and then we start to write up the requirements, and then a lot of mocking up of cardboard, plywood, duct tape, just to get people in and try to understand it in a prototyping phase. So this is something that I think certainly is used extensively in consumer products, that is human-centered design or design thinking. It's certainly used in the tech world, but you don't hear it so much in home construction. It's growing, and I think there's a discipline out there, environmental psychology, that really is kind of tackling, again, how do people feel, in a small space, and how do they occupy, or I shouldn't say just a small space, but a physical space in general, and what are the things that drive that? And Brett touched on one, which is air quality. We've spoken to people that come from an environmental psychology background and have studied smaller spaces. Air quality is the #1 biggest determinant of how people feel in the space. And it also is impacted by light, color, sound, all of those things, integrated into that occupant experience. So when we think about, who's living in a smaller space, let me talk a minute about the demographics and what's going on. It's interesting. If you think back 60 years ago, we had a very kind of defined way of thinking about households, right? It was the nuclear family. We had kind of gotten away from multi-generational family living. All of that has been changing over the last, I'd say 20 years, maybe 30 years. 1 in 5 households now is someone living solo. So think about that, 1 in 5, and that's a growing number. 1 in 5 is also multi-generational. And then we have, the rest of the demographics in there with an aging population. It's interesting right now in the US, 50% of the homes, or 55%, are owned by people 50 or older in this country. So we need to start thinking about that and how do we make a transition to other living options. But I think, and I always try not to generalize, but as we design homes, a lot of them today are one size fits all, right? We don't really necessarily think about who's going to be living there, what are their needs, how are they aging in that space, how can that space change as maybe a family member is added, your family grows. When I was young, it was very common to have an unfinished basement, and our basement was finished when I was a teenager. And I had countless friends who, their parents never finished the basement. It was a space that you grew into. And I think today, and I should say we still use that space for a variety of things, but it wasn't a finished living space. But today I think we tend to finish all of the space at once, and a lot of times that drives up the cost. If we were able to do it over time, and that was more accepted, then again we can drive housing at a lower price point to start for people, more of that starter home concept. A big part of what we're focused on, and I'm going to show you some examples of this in a minute, is this idea of the accessory dwelling unit. And as I mentioned, 60, 70 years ago, the accessory dwelling unit was legal. It was a legal housing options included by right in a lot of zoning. You're seeing changes across the US right now, which is great. And by default, they're smaller units. And so, we have to use all the principles that we're working on and be smart about it. But California in the West Coast is really the market leader. But it's interesting, in the state of California in 2017, they passed zoning where by right, it was statewide zoning allowing an accessory dwelling unit. There's 9 million single family homes. Not all can support backyard living, but a vast number can. And as many of us know, and some of you may be listening from the West Coast, real estate prices are crazy. It's changing again with COVID. It's really interesting to see, I think, some things leveling out a little bit, but certainly still very, very expensive real estate. And being able to allow an ADU, which is essentially can be placed in a backyard that's free real estate, right? That's been paid for or it's being financed already. So we think there's huge opportunities, but across the US, Minneapolis, Denver, Austin, Dallas, Washington, DC, all cities that have now allow an accessory dwelling unit. And I think I touched on Dweller as kind of the shared equity model, and I think there's more opportunity for that. We're actually working with a group on the East Coast that's leasing an accessory dwelling unit as a care cottage, and they'll lease it for $2,000 a month. So they put it into a backyard or another location on demand as needed, and they maintain it, and they remove it when that need is no longer there. So I think that's very exciting. I think certainly with people getting on the road and with remote working, it's really been interesting to see the RV industry, what's happening there. And I think with self-driving vehicles, I start to wonder if there's some new partnerships that will emerge and maybe some new models around subscription-based living. When we think about our housing, we tend to think about things in silos. And I know our own experience when we moved into our 800 square foot footprint home, we were able to part with a vehicle because of the transportation, and I could walk to work. Well, on average, that's $600 a month. So if we can take that out of the equation for people, same with healthcare and access to food and all of that, and think about housing as a more, think about it as a verb, I always say, versus a noun. And how can we, again, aggregate services in to be able to allow people to afford to live in a healthier environment in locations that maybe were prohibitive in the past. And then I think certainly, unlocking land, there's been a lot written about how many vehicle parking spaces we have per person or per vehicle in the U.S. And it's a crazy number. It ranges up to a billion parking spots across the U.S. I did see something the other day that said it's the equivalent of Rhode Island, I think, in New Hampshire combined is how much we've paved in the U.S. So can we start to take some of that back in places where we don't need it for retail? That whole world has changed. Commercial office parks, environments, a lot of vacant land there potential. What's interesting in California right now, which is interesting, is on the ballot this fall, there is a proposition to allow churches by right to be able to develop housing on their land. And as we start to look at new models for people being part of a church, not all of it is physical attendance. And the number that I saw is in California, just on church-owned land, they could add 42,000 new housing units, I think. And in a state where there's a shortage right now of 3.5 million units, that makes a dent in it. So I think we'll continue to see, higher density in suburban environments. But all of this can become possible again by unlocking land that previously in the past was kind of thought as not buildable or wasn't on the table. So let's go through some case studies. And again, any questions, please pass them to Brett. I'm happy to answer. This is actually the first unit that we constructed in 2014. And I show it because we introduced a couple of things in Grand Rapids, Michigan that were really revolutionary at the time. And this is just to give you some context. This was a new apartment building. This is a studio unit, roughly 500 square feet. But we put a wall bed in and a movable wall. And when we think about smaller spaces, flexibility, adaptability is so key. And, I like to tell the story. If you think about, how you use a space and how we build to support that. Well, we don't always need a dedicated bedroom, right? We don't always need a dedicated dining room table, things like that. If we can make those spaces multi-purpose, then you can take this is roughly 500 square feet. It could look like 700 square feet, based on the approach. So in this instance, there's a wall bed on the left. As I mentioned, the bed comes down over the sofa. Behind this movable wall that's caught in motion here in this image, there's a work surface on the other side, and there's another twin bed. So you could have a guest situation, again, as needed in the studio apartment. This is our little house in Heritage Hill that I mentioned. We have 4 bedrooms in this house, and it's a little deceiving when you look at it from this angle, but we have 2 fixed bedrooms, so one in the basement, so there is a full basement. We can do that in Michigan, which is great. And there's a bedroom upstairs. We see that dormer pop out of the roof. And so those are the 2 fixed bedrooms. On the main floor, we have a full kitchen, dining area, but in the dining area, there's a movable wall with a wall bed and a wall table. So we can take what is probably roughly 100, 120 square feet and have it serve as 3 different purposes. So we can take this 800 square foot footprint and make it live much larger. And I think by that as an approach, and a really important point to make is by shrinking the footprint, but adding the flexibility to support, the different needs I mentioned, we were able then to do things like spray foam insulation. We did radiant in-floor heating, high velocity cooling. And our energy bills for this house are roughly $100 a month, even in the polar vortex months. So, and as I mentioned too, we were able to reduce to 1 car. So if you start to think about those monthly costs and how those compound over time, but it's the first cost, right? And this is, I think, what we all face, in this industry is people always will challenge me and say, what's the cost per square foot? Well, we know that's subjective, right? What goes into that cost, you'll get different answers from different people. But I always come back with, we have more life per square foot. We have freedom, which is the mission of Urbaneer, and our purpose is to allow people to live freer lives through our approach. But if you think about the lifestyle that we lead, be able to walk to commercial environment, as I said, we're very fortunate to be able to walk to work, but then those monthly bills on the energy side, and as we were constructing this home, I had someone stop in front. It was a woman in her 30s, single mom, 2 kids, and she was renting in our neighborhood. And the first thing she said to me is, she said, "I want a little house just like that." And so we started talking, and I heard her story. She lived in a house that was built in 1905, just down the street. She rented half the house. Her utility bills were, I think, she said something like $400 a month in the winter. Icicles, all over the roof. And she lived in the neighborhood because it's where she grew up. Her family was nearby, so she had, a social family network here. And it wasn't far from work, and she had daycare for her kids. But if you think about, and she was paying $1,500 a month for rent. So there just weren't any other options for her to be able to, have something like this. And again, that's part of the motivation for building more. But this little house was actually built on a site where a duplex burned down in the early 90s. And the duplex was built, I think, in 1915. That was the approach that we wanted to take to replace a housing structure. But with current zoning, it wouldn't support it. So we just went, path of least resistance. And as long as we were 800 square feet or above, which we are here, we could build this. And I guess I'll add, we've used this as a showcase over the last few years. We continue to update it. We continue to kind of tinker with it. And we've learned a lot about things that we're actually now bringing to market. So that is actually a good segue. And as you look at these images, I will just be always very open with people. I'm not crazy about the exterior. We're working on some different images, but these are built in a factory, built with a partner. And we have 4 factories right now that can build this offsite. And these are the units that can be produced in 6 to 8 days. And we just placed one in Washington, D.C., and 2 in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we have some standardized floor plans for this, for the factory built model from 435 up to 660 square feet. And then we also have an approach for site build. Go ahead, Brett.
I was just going to say, can you just confirm that those numbers below are actual square feet? Somebody was saying how much square feet. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I should have it. Great, thank you. Yes, this is the square footage. So, and I don't know that I have some interior shots, not the floor plan. So yes, 435 square feet up to 660 square feet. So the one on the left, actually the 2 on the left, are a 1-bedroom with our movable wall product. And then the one on the right, the 660, has a fixed bedroom and then the flex bedroom. And I think for us, it's just been a great learning experience about, how do these get built in the factory? How do we install interior components that are flexible, multifunctional? And what we're doing now is building a network of partners, builders across the country that are taking this and that are kind of prefab on-site construction to market. And we've got a range of designs on the site-built units as well.
Hey, Bruce, there was a question about your house's square foot, and he was wondering which one of these was your size. I know the answer myself, but I'll let you answer it.
Well, so yeah, so this was something we did before, and just real quickly. So we were doing multifamily apartments. We did about 400 with our approach, and then started getting into single family. This was our first. This is really our prototype house for single family. So it's an 800 square foot footprint. And then and I'm sorry that I glossed over this earlier. So 800 down, we have roughly 300 square feet up, and then we have a full basement that's probably 700 square feet of finished space.
So and that was part of that is the requirements, right, of the sizing in the city currently, correct?
Correct. We probably would have built something a little smaller. Ideally, I would have loved to have built 2 units.
Yeah.
And, if I could wave a wand, that's what we would have today with our kids in their 20s. They're renting nearby. I'd rather charge them rent and put them in the backyard. But seriously, we probably would have built, 400 or 500 square feet. That's all my wife and I need in 2 other units, and maybe we had a lower level. But yeah, that, probably would have been very, very difficult where we live to get that passed. And part of the problem with a variance or by right, and many of you know this better than I, but to go in front of a planning commission and have everything defined and kind of ready to go, just waiting for permission, that's a cost that a lot of people can't go through because you could be rejected and doesn't get built, but you've already spent, whatever it might be, $5,000 or $10,000. The one thing I'll add before I'll jump forward is the front part of this house is really what became the inspiration for what we're building today across the country. And again, we can do a whole range of exterior treatments, but the front part that you're seeing is 512 square feet, and then there's a section behind the house that gives us the 800. But that front portion has the kitchen, the flexible bedroom with a movable wall and the wall bed, and a wall table. So it really serves as our living, sleeping, dining area.
Oh, wait, sorry, there was some clarification. Because we thought you had said 700 in the basement and 300 on the main floor. Just trying to get it under.
I should have had this outline here. So as you look at, so all in, we're roughly 1,1700 square feet. The footprint of this is 800 square feet. Upstairs, we have roughly 300, and downstairs, usable space, we have a utility room. I would put it at 600 square feet.
Okay. Do you know? Yeah. And I guess one question, just when we're talking, because I know the city of GR, or maybe other cities that do this, do they let you count the basement if you're under their square footage limits? Is that city by city? How does that work?
I know for the city of Grand Rapids, it was the footprint on the main floor had to be 800 square feet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Keep the questions coming. Those are good. And sorry to be if any of this is not apparent as I go through it. So this is the interior of what we're building and Offsite. And just to note, I'll go back a minute. So it's really that middle unit, that 510 square feet, which again, the inspiration was from our own home. But as you look at this space, and one thing that I think is so critical that I haven't mentioned yet is when we think about a process and we think about a design process, we were able to bring together the architect, interior design, industrial design, engineering, and off-site manufacturing all together to really work to create the space. And I said it before about how housing is siloed as an occupant, but as we know, it's very siloed from an industry. And we've seen some changes with design build and other things, and I think there's a lot coming. But that integration of just bringing the disciplines together to share ideas and to reach a higher level understanding. And we first did this with our LEED Gold home when it was under design in 2006. And one of the things I'm really proud of that we did is we actually brought into the early design session the landscape architect. And he made some suggestions around tree placements with windows and how we could, in effect, get shading to, reduce the energy load. And I just am really a big fan of that collaboration. And it's one thing that we're trying to do at Urban Years, again, bring those disciplines together. And as you see this image, I think part of that approach is reflected in the windows. We have the window placement, a lot of very positive comments from people about, when you walk in, you see natural light. You'll see in a minute, we have a window backsplash around our kitchen. Over our kitchen, we kind of took inspiration from somebody else for that, but we did that in our home. So very similar look. When you walk in, you see a lot of natural light. The volume of the space, it's a mono-pitch roof, sloping up towards the kitchen. So, or no, I'm sorry, the opposite way. But it gives you a sense of, volume of space. So I'll just go through and show you a few others here. So there's the window backsplash to the left. What we've learned as we design kitchens, because we do have our own integrated kitchen system, everything needs to be flush with the counter in a small space. If you have things sticking out, it just, the perception, back to the environmental psychology, is, you feel a little bit less, or a little bit maybe more claustrophobic, or it just strikes you that the space isn't as large as it could feel. So everything integrated in as much as possible. This view, you'll see the movable wall, so that's a track system. We can actually deliver power to that wall as it moves. We haven't automated the movement, but we can deliver 110 power, as you see that TV on the wall, and that's actually a patent that we have. But let's keep going. So here, you see the wall out now, so it creates a space on the other side. And Brett, there's your mini split, and I want to talk about the ERV. It's really interesting.
I was going to bring that up.
So now we go to the other side of that movable wall. So, and I'm sorry, I don't have a little video to play here, but so that wall comes out on the track. It reveals this, the space on the other side. And this is a wall bed. So here it is down. And again, we've just taken that space, which again, we could have a wall table on that movable wall. There could be some other dining space, but we've made it multi-purpose by moving that wall out, revealing the wall bed. Plenty of storage here. Again, all meant to work together as a system, and very easy to install. Very easy to occupy as a resident. And that's it. So I guess I thought I had one more case study in there. I don't, but happy to answer any questions at all, and happy to go back in. And I hope I didn't go through that too quickly, Brett. But I wanted to leave some time again for questions.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of questions. I think we're going to have a lot of conversation here. And before we get to those questions, just real quick here, I wanted to go over real quick where people can pick up their continuing ed. Can you see my screen now?
There you go.
There we go. And I know I'm kind of hiding here from everybody. So yeah, just real quick for those of you, we got some time for questions, maybe another 15 minutes or so. But if you want your continuing ed, please take that quiz that pops up. For those of you watching this in the future on demand, make sure to take the quiz. Sorry, if you're watching this live, there is no quiz. You're good. Just take the survey. For those of you who need to get your CEUs, please take that quiz. You can find it by clicking the YouTube link. You can head down to show more. On the right there, you can click need CEUs and follow the instructions to the quiz. And a huge thanks to all of our top tier sponsors, Mitsubishi, Build Equinox, Serve, Ream, and then also our board of directors, all of our volunteers who help us do what we do. So yeah, there are some questions coming in, obviously back to related to cost. And Bruce, you mentioned price life per square foot. That's one thing you mentioned. One thing we're seeing here, and a big challenge we have that I know is happening across the country, but that GHI's engaged in right in Grand Rapids, is obviously these areas where people, and especially now, it just costs so much to rent a house, and energy bills are high. You're probably suffering from health issues due to poor air quality and other problems from these units. So one thing we've seen is a couple right-sized modular houses come into the area. And so again, everyone's like, how much does this cost? How much does this cost? But what we're finding is that half of the cost for your mortgage, utility costs could be brought down to zero, even close to that with some of the projects we're seeing. So I guess, yeah, I mean, do you want to reveal your costs, Bruce, or talk about those? I leave that up to you, but can you just talk a little bit more about what kind of costs go into projects like this?
Sure, and I can quote some real numbers. I mean, things have been pretty dynamic over the summer with pricing and things. But on the West Coast, just to give you a real example, the wholesale price, which is how we look at things coming out of a factory, for example, that 510 square foot unit coming out of the plant is roughly $85,000. On the East Coast, we're seeing a unit that's a little bit higher level of fit and finish is roughly $110,000 to $115,000. So now that's the wholesale price. So on top of that, of course, transportation, construction services for installation, and then there's a builder margin. So that $85,000 unit may end up being $150,000 by the time it gets installed. The East Coast unit that I mentioned, that's $110,000, you might be up a little higher towards 200,000. And so what we've learned in this is we're getting about the same price, for example, of site built versus offsite. Just to clarify, there's some time efficiencies, and I think that's huge. And again, we have to look at everything that goes into the building. I think sometimes we silo it. I said a lot. So, but anyways, I'll land it there. That's for that 510, and you can kind of extrapolate out from there on the square footage.
And where are all these delivering to, around the country or limited areas?
We're currently working right now. I mentioned Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, but Denver, actually around the lakeshore here, Michigan City, Indiana, there's some active projects. Minneapolis, Detroit is really interesting. There's a big push now to do more single family housing in the neighborhoods in Detroit. So it's really across the country.
Yeah, that's great. And do you typically do them on basement, crawl space? Have you figured out how to do slab on grade yet?
So most of the units that are going into a backyard, there's not a basement, so it's typically on a crawl space for the utilities to be able to get those hooked up. So we haven't done anything yet that has a basement, but as we all know, that's a very efficient way to add more space. So I think we have some projects kind of in the pipeline where you will be placing a 510 square foot unit or a 660 square foot unit over a basement. And that's probably the threshold. I don't know for a smaller unit if it really makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is the wall bed unit designed to move on a daily basis? In the morning, you close the bed unit, push the movable wall back, and then in the evening, open the bed back up. And do you think people will adapt to these kinds of transformative spaces?
Yeah, good question. I typically say it's if you make your bed in the morning, you're probably more likely to put the bed away. I think it's just human behavior. But if you're living by yourself, maybe you're not doing that on a daily basis. It's meant for daily use, let me say that. And certainly we've had people for years, and think about, 100 years ago was the Murphy bed, right? So, but yeah, so ours are designed for daily use. It really depends on the situation, the individual occupant and how much space you have. If it's something that, like a studio apartment, our experience was most people would put that away every day if you're having people over, because otherwise it's a big hotel room. But I always preface all this by saying it's not for everybody. And one of the things that we do want to work on is automation of the wall bed and the movable walls, so it can be a true age-in-place solution, because as we age, lifting a wall bed and moving a wall isn't something that everybody's able to do.
Well, that's a great segue into the next question, which is more about barrier-free accessibility. I know aging in place. I hate to lump all those together, but we have a short time. I mean, how do you design for that? I mean, all the way from like when you're trying to get into the house and to avoid a step, we call it zero step in Grand Rapids, right? All the way to being able to navigate around the house. Does it make it more difficult when the homes are, I guess, quote unquote, smaller to be able to do that? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, again, design from the inside out based on the occupant, and we're looking at it, taking it in waves or phases. The ADA, the kitchen and the bathroom is where we're starting. We have a client. If you look up UMH Properties, their care cottages, they're the ones that are leasing the units. They're tackling a lot of this in currently with the ADA, kitchen and bath, and then we'll work on our components next. And then, but in parallel, they're working on access into the unit. So I think there's a certain size where, maybe it doesn't, lend itself to age in place. But I will say, and in my own experience with parents, living in 400 square feet in senior living, and I wish often that my parents could have lived in one of our siblings' backyards versus, in an institution at a certain point in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. You briefly touched on health of these homes, and obviously we know once you start adding duct systems and having to blow air around, that can reduce health. So I see some MiniSplit systems. Can you speak just briefly to that a little bit? I mean, even if somebody wanted to use a ducted system in a house like that, is that something you avoid, not recommended? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think over time we'll have more options. Well, in our own home, I talked through, how we heat and cool. One of the things we've noticed in a smaller space, when you have a duct system and you have bulkheads covering up those ducts, you tend to get the perception of less space. And so in our house, putting the heating in the floor, hot air rises, so it's more efficient, and the high velocity cooling, which is a very small duct system, right, about this big, if you can see that. So we have no bulkheads in our house, and so that was a little bit of the approach with the MiniSplit. And I think in a small space, they seem to perform pretty well, and they're pretty economical. But I think we want to look at more options as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see, the other thing here was, let's just talk about policy for a second. And, I know there's a lot of policy issues being able to do these kinds of things. Do you guys get involved in that at all, or, assist there? What are your thoughts?
Currently, we're working in areas that have already been kind of converted or reformed to the 21st century. I get involved a little bit around the edges. It's so hard to try to take that one on because, if you think about those 3 Ps, the policy part is you could spend your whole life on it, and there are people that do, and thank you for doing that. We're really focused on the process and product side. And again, working in markets, there's such a big demand out there in markets where the zoning, is I would just say more up to date and friendly for this. So that's where we're starting.
And I sent a link to the chat to anybody who's interested. There's, I think, accessorydwelling.org gets heavily involved in that if people want to dive in. So I did put that out there. Let's see here. I love the concept of these compact home. One feature I often see overlooked and a feature that greatly impact the user's perception of size and living space is outdoor living areas. Have you explored more outdoor space for these units, covered porches, front porches, anything that could encourage a sense of, community, even if porches are not involved?
Great point. And it's funny, my wife, Brenda, who I mentioned, is a designer and co-founder. We talk about that frequently, constantly. We do. And in our home, having the front porch that you saw is great, but we wish that we had incorporated more indoor-outdoor living. We have a client right now that wants to incorporate a nano wall in an environment that would be great for it out west. So I think we'll absolutely be doing more and more of that because you're right. When you're in a small space, typically you're in a neighborhood where, that becomes your backyard or your living room and you're outside a lot. And so having the indoor-outdoor is absolutely critical. And it's something I wish we had tackled a little earlier, but we're on it now.
Can you talk a little bit more about the I guess the cranes getting back into the backyards? Is that something that you all involved in, or were you just referencing another project?
Yeah, so we work through builders that are providing, contracting for that level of construction service. And some are craned. We have a partner in Northern California that just used a Bobcat, and left a unit on the trailer and brought it around a house. And if you look at perpetualadu.com, so perpetualadu.com, and you scroll down their homepage, you'll see the unit being delivered in the backyard. I'll add, not all backyards or small, compact, urban infill lots are accessible to offsite manufacturing, which is why we're doing kind of the prefab componentized site built as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you see more opportunities in multifamily for this? I mean, I've heard the term sort of micro apartments out there. Do you get involved in that?
We've done a number of them, and we actually have a project right now in New Jersey that has some smaller units. I think we work best when we're really at the table and kind of being able to guide the floor plan and the space optimization, which we did on that project. So But yes, we certainly, will work wherever we can. The first part of our company's history was exclusively multifamily, and now we're doing a mix.
Well, Bruce, I know you have to get going. We are at our time here. If people have any more questions or want to reach out to you to learn more, where can they contact you to get more information?
Yeah, my email's here, bruce@urbaneerliving.com, and my mobile phone is there as well. So feel free to reach out, and look forward to following up. And Brett, thank you very much for including me, and happy to come back in the future.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, and great to see you at least virtually. Hopefully, we someday can catch up safely in Grand Rapids. So,
2021.
yeah, exactly. So, take care. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week. Goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.